Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Beyond the Alert. Today I'm thrilled to speak with Andy Triedman, partner at Theory Ventures. Andy, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Anne. Happy to be on the show.
So you have a fascinating background in both computational neuroscience and AI. I would love to have you tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up very much a science person. My parents were both doctors, and I was very interested in biology and medicine, and so got into the field of neuroscience. But this was in the sort of recent days of emerging deep learning systems, which, as many people say, are sort of inspired and in some ways similar to neural networks in the brain. And so I got more and more excited about these sort of intersection of intelligent systems, what we could learn about the brain, and how we could apply them in computational models. And ended up doing more and more machine learning, both building machine learning models to make predictions about brain data and using the brain to inspire and design different kinds of neural network architectures. I got more and more interested in the ML and software side of things. So I ended up pivoting away from the life sciences and then spent the last 10 years doing a variety of operating, investing, and consulting roles, mostly in and around the world of machine learning and data in different domains.
It's fascinating. And when you typically look at the existing investor base out there, right, they're always forward thinking, but at the same time, all of the models on growth, what companies are scaling, what companies are giving you the best odds in terms of an investment standpoint, they almost have to rethink their approach, right? Because the current idea of scaling with headcount and the like has fundamentally changed. So would love to kind of hear your input on that and how you at Theory are thinking through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree. I think the current wave of AI capabilities pretty dramatically changes all sorts of things that startups and investors think about in terms of both, one, what the technology is capable of, two, what kinds of products you can build with that, and then three, what companies look like in terms of their organizational structure and their financing needs and their roadmaps in order to capitalize on those, and how markets change, how competitive landscapes change, et cetera. At Theory, we approach this through the lens of depth. So our model is to be extremely focused with how we spend our time, invest in a very small number of companies. And that gives us a lot of time to go very, very deep in research. We are reading basically every new paper and blog post and tweet that comes out about emerging state-of-the-art capabilities in machine learning systems, both in terms of the sort of academic and scientific frontier, as well as engineered systems built with them. And so we like to understand the technology very deeply, and then we take a similar lens into different markets. So doing a very proactive, in-depth market research exercise to understand how AI really changes how different functions or industries might operate, and how it changes what kinds of new companies are possible and are exciting, whether those are at the infrastructure layer or the application layer. And our thought is that in a time of technological change, it creates a huge amount of opportunity, but also a huge amount of opportunity to be slightly off in a prediction or to misunderstand how the technology or certain market will evolve. And so that's why we take the strategy of trying to go very deep and to make a small number of decisions that we can hopefully make in a very well-informed way.
So with all the research that you're doing, it must be pretty easy in relative terms for you to understand in the noise of all of the entrepreneurs saying, hey, I have latest AI native technology, really understanding who gets it and who doesn't, right? And who has that seasoned experience with multiple patents and what have you. Because looking at it from just a marketing standpoint, right? Everyone is saying they have AI, and how do you really stand out in the noise? I'm sure you in Theory must be getting bombarded with, especially now with the way that coding can happen at light speed and all of the above, right? With new ideas and kind of being able to vet those and weed out the real ones from the ones that don't have as much potential.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think, both we spend a lot of time thinking both in terms of what is possible and what's possible to do effectively and reliably enough to, sell to enterprise customers, for example. So we spend a lot of time trying to dive deeply into understanding what is real and what is maybe more speculative. And in addition to that, on the other side, thinking about like what is hard and where you can build defensibility, which can come in a variety of different ways. It can come in systems engineering, can come in data, can come in operational know-how. And so trying to really probe on both of those ends to find the right opportunities and the right teams where it is possible to build something that delivers value, but there is enough complexity that there will really be difference in teams' ability to execute. And then to your point, I think thinking about how that changes the DNA of teams that are required to build these systems effectively. I think one of the other things we're thinking about is just with an entirely new kind of software to build, where do teams, how do teams succeed and where do they struggle, and what kinds of people do you need to have and what kinds of operational processes do you need to have to be able to build effective AI native applications, which we think are very different from traditional enterprise software.
It's fascinating. Must be so many new approaches and all the data points that you have compared to the kind of traditional operating models out there. It's a fascinating space. So in terms of, you mentioned something interesting, the industry's changed. How is cyber different when you're looking at cyber versus other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few characteristics of cyber that make it really interesting in the context of AI. I think one, cyber is a perpetual attacker and defender game where the landscape is constantly changing. It is not a static environment. And so thinking to AI driving impact on security orgs, I think one of the first things that many security executives would think about is the increasing threat landscape, where AI makes it much easier for attackers to do things like spear phishing or to get access to networks or to impersonate employees, et cetera. And so AI accelerates the threat landscape. And at the same time, I think when you look on the operational side, security teams and, throughout in different functions throughout the security organization are defined in large part by information overload. So, if you look at the security software landscape today, we have a huge number of sensors and detections. And the bottleneck is almost always on the capacity to interpret those signals and remove the noise and find the true signal or the true positives that you need to worry about. And very excitingly, the same AI technology that attackers can use to hack a system shows, I think, really great promise in being able to approximate how a human thinks about these problems and to dramatically increase the capacity of security teams to deal with these existing and emerging threats. And so our hope is that by unblocking the capacity side, AI can shift security teams from reactive and overloaded to proactive, where people can spend time doing things like threat hunting and security engineering, and you don't need to be devoting the vast majority of your resources to triage. So I think that's where, from a sort of overall market side, where we see AI being extremely impactful within security. I think the other major side, thinking about what kinds of companies are started and are successful, is that in the previous generation of security products, they are mostly insurance style products. They're protecting you against some future risk that may or may not happen. And if they're working well, it means that probably nothing happened, because most of the time you're not getting attacked. And so that makes them really hard to evaluate in a quantitative way, and means that the deals are typically much more relationship and reputationally based, just because you can't actually really evaluate how well a product is working, because most of the time nothing happens. And so that really advantaged, sales-led teams and people that sort of just built in on their personal network and relationships to sell software to folks that maybe they had sold software to previously. What we see in this next wave of AI-enabled security startups are a number of different opportunities where you can improve security posture and outcomes by automating human work. And one side effect of that is that it is much easier to evaluate those platforms. You can say, hey, here's a job that a human did. Let's have the AI system do it. Did it do it as effectively? Did it do it as quickly? Did it do it as cheaply, et cetera? And with a much clearer scoreboard, you can no longer have a sort of sales-driven organization that doesn't have a real product behind it. And so our hypothesis is that the next wave of AI native security companies will be much more product and technology led, and that many buyers' evaluation criteria will switch from primarily relationship and reputation based to reputation and relationship still being important, but needing to have a product that can really be deployed and work in production in a verified way.
That's interesting. And so, more critical than ever is on the marketing side to make sure that you talk about the outcomes and the ROI, right? And how proactive, how do you measure something that's proactive versus reactive?
Yes. Oh yeah. No, I think, and even prior to the current LLM wave, I think security buyers have been very cautious about AI claims because there have been very few sort of true AI products that really delivered value to their or measurable value to their organization. And I think now when you see that every security product, both new and existing, has incorporated AI into the name and marketing, that really, driving and measuring outcomes is what people will really be making these decisions based off of.
It's interesting. And so then in terms of, 40 plus direct competitors later for us, for example, here at Dropzone, how are you going to measure the trajectory and the growth path of companies? Because everyone starts sounding the same. Do you have everything down to science on your end that you already know kind of who the main players will be and you're just validating that as the companies grow? Or how are you assessing it? Because everyone starts sounding the same. And obviously the SOC space is kind of, to your point, right? The lowest hanging fruit of turning something highly reactive and inefficient into something proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I think about it from two lenses or two stages. So I think first in terms of the kinds of teams that we would be excited to back, like Dropzone, I think we look extremely closely at who has the AI native product and technology expertise. It is imperative, of course, to have security domain knowledge or just generally domain knowledge as well. But I think increasingly we see a number of teams that only have that core domain knowledge and DNA and don't have the sort of core AI native experimentation oriented mindset. And I think what we see is those teams just often struggle with product and technology execution in terms of their ability to, build new products and features that work reliably and deliver customer value. So I think first is sort of like looking for the right DNA of the team out of the pack. And those are the folks and the teams like Dropzone that we're really excited to partner with. And we think that, to a certain extent in the early stages, that core product and technology capability is really going to speak for itself and be what drives growth. And so I think when you talk to, any of the early Dropzone customers, they have such glowing reviews. They could get it set up quickly. They're seeing it, process and drive massive value in terms of actually investigating and resolving the vast majority of their tickets. And then those customers can go to the next set of customers and say, hey, we really love working with Dropzone. They were able to implement extremely quickly, probably much more quickly than any other tool that we looked at, and they're driving much better results. And so I think that that's sort of like the key in the early stage of growth. I think we imagine that over time, even though there are large numbers of companies being started around these ideas because they're good ideas, that you will see a pretty massive consolidation. And that will come from some combination of sort of like reputation and real deployments. So I think, Dropzone is starting to work with and has already begun to work with a number of Fortune 500 and very large MSSPs. And that creates the credibility that helps you sort of ladder up into larger and larger accounts. I think you can't go and sell a very large enterprise until you've already sold an almost as large enterprise. And so we think that that combined with fundraising and market awareness and recognition by channel partners, et cetera, will help sort of call the herd and mean that these companies that have the core technology and then can invest aggressively in growth and marketing and customer acquisition will be able to pull ahead of the pack, and that the rest of the folks will wind down over time.
That's the goal. So in terms of, you mentioned teams, right? And finding the founders and entrepreneurs who really understand both AI as well as the technology and have that domain expertise. For the company as a whole, as it tries to scale when we have initial traction, for your portfolio companies, what are you looking at in terms of the team structure? What kind of people are you looking for? Because obviously the traditional resume may or may no longer cut it, right? Someone can have the domain experience, but are they understanding the pace of both cyber and AI? And what does it take? Are you setting an expectation of making sure the entire company is kind of walking the talk on the AI front? Talk me through that a little bit just to understand better.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And frankly, we are to a certain extent like in somewhat uncharted waters because the technology is changing how you can build teams. And to a certain extent, we're actually learning from folks like companies like Dropzone about how they're finding and hiring and retaining the best talent for the job. I think it probably impacts companies pretty differently on the EPD, the engineering product design side of things, compared to the go-to-market side of things. We see on the engineering side the ability to dramatically increase product velocity without dramatically increasing teams. And I think for a while it's been clear to any sophisticated engineering leader that just adding more headcount doesn't necessarily increase your product development velocity. And in fact, in some cases, you can slow it down by creating just management overhead and tech debt and things like that. And so I think that generative AI, particularly on the engineering side, allows you to pretty dramatically slim down and change your hiring plans, and that we will see teams that are much leaner and probably have much more sort of senior folks that are both sophisticated and understand what to build and are sophisticated with these emerging AI systems and how to sort of manage a fleet of software engineering agents or effectively use copilots to help you increase your development velocity. And so I think on those, we expect to see teams be much leaner and still be, extremely fast moving. On the go-to-market side, I think we expect to see the impacts of AI be a little bit more incremental. Obviously, they can help with things like researching and prospecting, et cetera. But we think that by and large, those functions will look more similar to what they have in the past. And that in these competitive environments, you will want to continue to staff up go-to-market resources that can get you in front of customers and can help you run pilots, prove the value, and then implement the product in an effective way. I think it is important that those people understand AI, but at the same time, back to our previous comment, the goal with these products is you sell outcomes. And it should take, even someone that has, deep security domain expertise, but only a moderate understanding of AI can understand what a Dropzone AI agent does when it can autonomously investigate and resolve alerts for you. And so I think to a certain extent, like the product should be able to sell itself with strong people on the go-to-market side to help find the right folks, communicate that value proposition, and deliver value to the customer.
And that's really interesting. It's right in line with, the buyers doing 80% of the research before they want to talk to someone, and seeing the customer stories and all of the third-party essentially validation and building trust through dark funnels to then come to the table, which changes marketing quite a bit as well. When AI founders pitch you, what kind of red flags do you immediately can you tell of whether or not they're understanding the underlying technology?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think to me, the major thing is understanding the non-determinism and uncertainty, both of the system capabilities as well as the technology development. And so I think people that have a sophisticated understanding of the technology will have a very thoughtful understanding of how customers perceive quality and reliability and where you're most likely to run into challenges just around maybe the data or the machine learning models or the processes, not being sufficient to create that reliability in the system, and how you improve that over time and where you are likely to hit certain ceilings, et cetera. And so I think having like a very nuanced understanding of what the target can be, how to get there, what the challenges will be, and how to mitigate them is one component in terms of system performance. And then I think on the other side, in terms of technology development, these are also, as complex systems, they are very different from traditional software engineering, where you can't say, hey, this feature is going to take us 2 sprints to build for 2 people, and so we'll have it done next month. Understanding that you need to be constantly running experiments, and you are managing work streams that may or may not deliver the results that you want, and may or may not be have variable timeframes. And so how to effectively it's a critical still to think about, to understand how to effectively manage engineering and research resources when they are not sort of fitting nicely into sprint planning, and they have more sort of experimentations that need to run a variable length work. And so I think those are sort of the major 2 things that I look to understand a sort of sophisticated AI native founder versus maybe one that is more recently moved into the space after LLMs were released.
Interesting. And what do you consider the most overhyped AI capability and security right now that founders are promising but can't really deliver on?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think there are three things. One is fully autonomous, hands-off security for entire portions of the stack or entire threat vectors. As any security organization thinks of layered security, while you should be able to drive for very high levels of automation in key parts of that stack, for example, in tier one SOC operations, and maybe increasingly moving up over time, there will always be a role for expert operators to be involved, whether it is certain alerts that are too complicated and you need to pass through a human, or whether it is just a human that needs to sort of configure a new rule set for your organization, just given that every organization has so much internal process and information which may not be encoded and is different from company to company. And AI systems are just not able out of the box to handle that. So I think one, there's sort of like always a role for domain and company experts to be involved in some way. I think two, one like very interesting, but still to me not very early in the nascent stage are the sort of like offensive security and AI pen testing capabilities. I think that is a very promising and exciting area when it comes to bear. But I think when you talk to folks that are experts in the domain, they understand that just the search space is so broad that even as AI systems get better and cheaper, we are still very far away from having these systems be able to replicate the capabilities of the most sophisticated pen testers or offensive security professionals. And I think when you look at a market where many companies just want the simple check the box, but otherwise they want sort of the best of the best, we are still, I think, a ways away from having AI systems that can really investigate and penetrate a large organization scale. I think the third one that we also find interesting, but is still very nascent, is security around AI systems and AI agents. This is certainly an emerging area of interest and concern for CISOs as AI assistants get deployed more broadly across the organization, as AI systems get access to more sensitive data and systems by NCP to different internal services. And I think we see that as an important emerging area, but one where there is so much uncertainty still in how this stack evolves, that it is unclear yet what exactly those solutions will need to look like in order to best protect an organization or where in the stack those should live. And so that's an area that we find very interesting, but we think is still probably overhyped in the capabilities for people to adequately protect against those emerging systems.
For sure. That sounds like a Pandora's box on the last one.
Yeah.
And then looking at margins, right? And companies being profitable or startups, given the high costs still, as well as automation workflows, things like that can create efficiencies. How do you think through that at Theory?
I'd say that overall, we are, in most enterprise cases, not too concerned around margins. And that's for two reasons. One, I think increasingly we find these AI systems can replicate sort of advanced human thinking. And, having humans look at everything can be very expensive. And so the comparison set is pretty high. And second, I think we've seen sustained or increased improvement in model capabilities matched with, dramatic decreases in model cost. And so I think we feel comfortable that if you can build a system that is gross margin neutral, roughly today, that you will see those margins expand pretty dramatically over time as people just improve on the model side. We have started to think a little bit more, I think, when interesting lens, everyone or folks understand the cost per token or cost per million tokens, but there is also maybe like a value side associated in terms of like how many tokens do you need to generate in order to create some amount of customer value. And there are problems that have very different amounts on that side, even if the contract sizes are similar. So as two examples, on the SOC side, when you have a human analyst, they may only be looking at, tens of alerts at a time. And, if each of those alerts takes, a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of tokens, you can make the map pencil out versus, for example, we're previously talking about AI pen testing. If you need to explore, millions of different branches, each one of those, which requires a bunch of research in order to find one thing that you can exploit, You just need to generate many, many orders of magnitude more tokens in order to create something that is valuable for the customer. And so that is one thing that we have started to look at in terms of different domains, just what the level of complexity or amount of compute you need in order to do something useful for the customer. With that being said, I think we feel pretty confident about the value of these systems and the cost going down over time. So I think across that spectrum, there still are things that are pretty interesting to us.
Be interesting to see in the next few years how that changes and whether founders are kind of ahead of the curve or now on point, right? In terms of costs and ROI.
Yeah, I think it also presents a new opportunity for, investment in accelerating growth. I think, you traditionally see companies that raise a lot of money to spend a lot on sales and marketing to grow more aggressively. And you may also see as these systems become more complex and people are building more and more sophisticated and expensive systems, that people will invest heavily in gross margin neutral or even slightly gross margin negative products in order to, dramatically accelerate adoption and growth and use, venture capital money in order to help finance that. I mean, obviously you've seen with some of the consumer and prosumer apps like Cursor are running at, gross margin either neutral or negative, and burning capital to invest in growth. I think it's possible you see that on the enterprise side as well.
Interesting. And then coming to synthetic data, they obviously we work with that at Replica. How do security teams or should they think about data quality for their AI initiatives?
Yes, very closely is the short answer. So, I think when you look at the previous generation of data and synthetic data, you were mostly looking at things like, I want to generate spreadsheet of data that looks like PII, but is not actually representative of real people. So I just want to generate realistic looking names or addresses, phone numbers, etc. But you just needed it to sort of like, you squint at it and it looks like real data. You didn't need it to actually be representative of your customer base or in your environment necessarily. I think with the emerging AI systems having high quality data that represents the things you want it to represent or you want the system to learn, it will become extremely important. I think, to a certain extent, we see that as the sort of key role and value of companies like Dropzone. We think that, Dropzone will be the world's expert in SOC analysis, having worked across, many hundreds of customers and investigated, at some point, millions of different tickets and alerts. And so to a certain extent, like it will be better than any company could ever be or any individual SOC analyst could ever be just because of its breadth of experience gained across so many different customers and seeing so many different systems. With that being said, as mentioned earlier, every single company has nuances in terms of how their systems are set up, how their processes are set up, how their businesses and people operate, as well as many businesses, particularly on the larger enterprise side, have data that they don't want to share or be shared across different customers. And so the ability to sort of combine the out-of-the-box capabilities with an expert system or an expert AI platform like Dropzone with the internal data within an organization, I think will be the key for those to be successful. And I think, again, it will be like mostly, my guess is it will be products like Dropzone that demonstrate to a company what kind of information they need to put into the system or how to connect to the right ticketing and data systems in order to do that, as opposed to sort of like companies working on a data platform and then bringing it to a startup like Dropzone.
Awesome. Now, when it comes to pitch decks, obviously the AI is changing the game there as well. What are, I would say, 1 to 3 things that you would advise a founder that they have to include or should not include anymore? How has it changed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think clarity around the design of your system and what specifically are the inputs and outputs and how you're leveraging, where you're leveraging foundation models, where you're building retrieval systems around them, where you're building other kinds of orchestration and adaptation systems. These sort of like deep dive details into the product design and architecture is really important for investors to understand exactly what the sort of shape of this problem looks like from a technical perspective. And I think becomes really important to distinguish sort of a novel approach or a differentiated approach versus one that is maybe easier to replicate. Second, I think it's really important to, when many of these platforms create value from automation, it's really important to very deeply understand the workflow and the use case
Mhm.
It is typically not as simple as, they buy software platform A and now we're going to replace it with software platform B. It is, we understand this function very deeply. Here's how that function works today and how it will change with AI. And here is how AI creates value through that change and who it creates value for and how they evaluate that value and any, incentive alignment that they need in order to realize that value. And I think, just understanding how, many of these buyer organizations and core functions will look really different in a world where AI is deployed broadly means that you need to dive much more deeply into sort of like how those organizations and people work and how to affect change in a way that's valuable. And then I think in terms of, things that are maybe less relevant, at least on our side, I think being overly broad in terms of the sort of like total addressable market, I think you often will find, if you abstract enough levels above into, say all work in this domain or all software in some market category, it's easy to have a really big number in terms of what the addressable market looks like. And, I think that those we just find are not relevant both in, in terms of like AI will dramatically change what a lot of these businesses look like. And
Mhm.
there are a large number of AI businesses trying to automate different functions. And so we think like, again, going back to just really understanding the function and the domain, understanding how AI creates value in it, and then sort of like having a very clear path to executing on that market is what is most important to convey in the pitch deck.
Tell us a little about Theory Ventures, who you include as portfolio companies, what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a very focused and concentrated early stage firm based in San Francisco. We invest entirely in what we call technology enabled new category creation. So that is, new types of products, businesses, and companies that are only now possible due to changes in technology. And we invest across both the infrastructure and the application layer. So on the application side, we are obviously investors in Dropzone. We're investors in other AI security companies like Maze, who are working on vulnerability management, DOS, who's building an AI native ERP platform, and AMP, who's building an AI native sort of agentic infrastructure for personalization, both in terms of customer communication as well as in-application personalization. We've invested in another number of core infrastructure companies like LanceDB, who are working on an AI native multimodal database, MotherDuck, who is building next generation Snowflake built around DuckDB. And on the data side, we're invested in companies like Omni as well. We're building a BI platform, and Allium is building core data infrastructure for finance and crypto. So sort of across, we are investing in entirely sort of technology-oriented companies across data and machine learning, where we really like to get involved or when there is a clear sense that there is a market need and there's early technology to market fit, and then helping founders go from that stage to building out their first sort of full go-to-market engine that they can start to scale as the company grows. And so really thinking about those sort of like 0 to 1 go-to-market team building activities, new category creation, et cetera, is where we really like to lean in and help out.
Awesome. And where can people learn more about you, find you, connect with you, as well as Theory?
They can find us at our website, which is theory.ventures, or on LinkedIn at Theory Ventures. And we'll have a new website announcement soon, but folks can check us out, maybe follow us on LinkedIn. It'll be a good place to start.
Awesome. And with that cliffhanger of the new website coming soon, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Andy. It has been a blast. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Anne.
Thank you.